Prime Minister's questions.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 1 to the Honourable Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister indicate when a statement would be made with regard to the renegotiated terms and conditions of the Mitsubishi plant project in light of the assurances given on March 18, 2016, June 17, 2016, and September 14, 2016, that the government would report to the country when an agreement is finalized?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can give the House the assurance now that that statement, a comprehensive one, would be laid at the next sitting of Parliament.
Member for Chaguanas West, your next question.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister indicate the arrangements entered into by the Ministry of Tourism and various international airlines to provide airlift to Tobago, and can the Prime Minister give an undertaking to provide the costs of this arrangement?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As you know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, these questions come with very little lead time. This particular question asks for some specific cost data, which we have to consult the Tobago House of Assembly. The question as written, if provided in another forum under a different standing order, can and will elicit a detailed answer with respect to the arrangements and the costs, since these arrangements are largely guided by the Tobago House of Assembly.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But the second part of the question, recognizing the limitations in terms of time, Honourable Prime Minister, asks whether you can give an undertaking to provide the necessary cost arrangements.
That's what I just did. Obviously, I wasn't successful. Yes, I'm giving that undertaking. But I'm saying if you file the question under another standing order, which you're very familiar with, under different circumstances, we can respond to your specific question. However, if it makes you happier, I can undertake now to give you an answer to this in writing after today.
Thank you.
Chaguanas West, next question.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Next question. Question number 3. To the Honourable Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister indicate the reasons for the decision to revoke the appointment of Ambassador Eden Charles, Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in keeping with the Civil Service External Affairs regulations, the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs maintains, as far as is practicable, a schedule of rotation of staff between headquarters and missions, and between missions. In this context, the officer was overdue for rotation to headquarters, having served for 11 years undisturbed in the same post.
Supplemental, Chaguanas West.
So, Honourable Prime Minister, the principle then in terms of foreign affairs is that when I say come, you come at. When I say go, you go at.
And I'm sure that's a better principle than if I say come, you go elsewhere, and you don't come.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister state whether the Economic Development Advisory Board, chaired by Dr. Terence Farrell, has delivered any recommendation for stimulation of growth of the Trinidad and Tobago economy?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thus far, the Economic Development Advisory Board has delivered at...
Member for Couva South. Please, if you have any mutterings, you know the procedure to proceed. So please do not interrupt. Thank you. Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I was saying, as of today, the Economic Development Advisory Board has delivered at least 7 advisory notes which come to the Office of the Prime Minister. And if I just go identify them for you, there was a advisory note responding to the declining revenue scenario. That was the first advisory note that came from that board. Then we got a note on the tripartite discussions on the economic adjustment program. Then we had one on accelerated deepening of relations between Trinidad and Tobago and Couva. Another one was establishing a heritage fund, separate and apart from what exists now. Item 5, preliminary proposals for the pursuit of mutually beneficial opportunities between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela in the current economic situation. And this particular note has been the basis of a lot of work we're doing in the energy sector, and in the very near future we'll have something to say about that. Item number 6 was revisiting current macroeconomic policy management, and this has been very useful in the Ministry of Finance's handling of the current macroeconomic situation. There was also a note on engaging the Trinidad and Tobago West Indian diaspora, which is actively engaging the attention of the government. And again, we'll talk about that a bit later on. And there was also work done on liaising intensively with the IDB to operationalize a technology foresighting exercise as a necessary step to the creation of research and development centers and to initiate studies on the siting of a modern port and logistics hub as part of the redevelopment of the port of Port of Spain.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Will these notes, these 7 notes, be made available to members of Parliament for perusal?
Honourable Prime Minister.
As and when it is deemed useful, we did indicate that from time to time we'll make some of these notes public, but you must understand that these notes are advisory notes to the government, to the cabinet, and we will make them public as appropriate.
Member for Point of Pierre.
Good day. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister list who are the members that sit on this Economic Advisory Board, please?
Honourable Prime Minister, you have the information today?
It's on the public record. We've published that from the Office of the Prime Minister. It is chaired by Professor Dr. Terence Farrell, and I don't want to go guessing because there are so many committees that I don't want to call a wrong name, but this information has been made public, and if it's to be made public, if you ask a question, we can resubmit to you.
Member for Caroni East.
Could the Honourable Prime Minister indicate whether that the issue on the heritage fund that you spoke about, is that in keeping with the legislation that is proposed to separate the heritage aspect from the stabilization aspect, or is it a separate issue?
It is,
Honourable Prime Minister.
it is in fact that issue as to whether we should have, we currently have a heritage and stabilization fund. And one can make a distinction between what the heritage fund means and how it should operate, and what the stabilization fund is and what it is meant for. And there is a discussion, and there are different points of view as to whether we should maintain one fund of heritage and stabilization. And there's a stronger point of view that we should separate the heritage fund. And the point being made that the heritage fund is not to be touched in the way that we use the stabilization fund, as we have done recently, to provide budget support. And it is in context of that discussion that the board has given us advice on the establishment of a heritage fund. And we are working towards a decision on that. And as soon as we agree on that as government, we will bring that to the Parliament if that is the decision taken.
Supplemental, Caroni East, member.
Yes, these measures that have been advised by or sent to the Prime Minister from the Economic Advisory Board, do these recommendations impact upon, or are there any relationships of those recommendations to the IMF recommendations, which the government seem to move on with from time to time? Are there any nexus between those recommendations and the IMF recommendations that the government works from time to time with?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, just to make it abundantly clear, this government has stated over and over that we are taking responsibility for our adjustments, and this Economic Advisory Board has no nexus to the IMF, and we are taking no instructions from the IMF on this, and this is in fact a situation when there's no nexus between this exercise, which will guide this government's policy, and any arrangement which may or may not come with IMF contact.
Member for Chaguanas West, question number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister state when outstanding debts to contractors in various sectors of the economy will be paid?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, all governments are continuously making payments to those persons and contractor agencies who supply goods and services to the state. This government has been doing that, and we have been making payments to legitimate claims from contractors. We have been rejecting claims that have been found to be questionable or in some instances outright corrupt, and this is an ongoing process, and we've paid substantial amounts of monies to contractors since we've come into office, and that process is continuing.
Member for Naparima.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister state what protocols are being considered by his government to deal with the possibility of an increase of U.S. deportees arriving at our shores in the light of possible new immigration policies by the recently elected Republican administration?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I just want to make it abundantly clear that the term deportee means something as against the phrase returning national. This question is specifically about deportees, meaning persons who have been subject to the United States judicial process and for whom a decision has been made to repatriate them by United States government action. Insofar as that is the understanding of the term deportee, then protocols are in place, have been in place prior to the arrival of Donald Trump and the Republican government, and we will continue to use those protocols which give us some advance notice, if I dare say warning, of such persons who are returning to our country having been subject to adverse court arrangements in America. And when they get here, some element of debriefing takes place, and depending on the nature of that debriefing and the outcome, such persons may or may not be kept under surveillance. And of course, other persons who might return to our country, not by virtue of any United States judicial process, but who may on their own volition, in response to pressures in the U.S. market or living space, are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who are free to come and go as they wish.
Supplemental. Naparima.
Would the Prime Minister tell us whether his government would be prepared to review the subventions to institutions like Vision on Mission that cater for, that assist with problems like this?
We would like to do that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because we understand the very good work that is being done, and there's no point in us burying our heads in the sand. The work that is being done by these organizations are valuable in maintaining national security and national stability. And if, as we expect, that the flow is increasing, and as we see that these people are arriving in our community and without help, they could become catalysts for criminal conduct in our country, it would do well for us to assist those organizations.
Member for Naparima, question 7.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that state-of-the-art equipment is lying unused at the Couva Children's Hospital, while problems exist with similar equipment at other health facilities? And could he state what steps are being taken to deal with this anomaly?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this question arises from a situation where new, I'm not sure if it is state-of-the-art, but new equipment has been placed on a construction site by persons who felt that was the best thing to do. UDCOT issued taking over certificate to Shanghai Group International Caribbean Limited on July 25th, 2016. Let me explain that. The government of Trinidad and Tobago did not take delivery of this facility since it was under construction. We did not take delivery until July 25th, 2016. Could not. This is a facility which was opened for political purposes in September of 2015, while being a construction site containing the said equipment which I'm being questioned about. It will be in bad faith to utilize said equipment, given that an expression of interest has been issued for a PPP arrangement, and that proposed partners will have to understand that such equipment was in place. Let me explain that. Since we have taken over this facility, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, wanting to put this facility into the healthcare delivery system, has gone out for expressions of interest from the public, local and international. As soon as the deadline would have passed and we would have got those expressions of interest, we will know what kinds of developments can take place there, and we will determine who and what agency or what company, local or international, will be made to operate this facility, and the equipment is part of that arrangement of the public-private partnership. It is not prudent to relocate the equipment in a capricious, ad hoc manner, and this has been already commissioned at the site due to the risk of damage to the equipment. So that is where this is at. I hope that in the very near future, the government of Trinidad and Tobago will be able to report that we've got some useful interest and to bring that facility into the healthcare delivery system.
Supplemental, member for Caroni East.
Advent of a successful PPP model being sought for the complex. What does the general population, what would happen to the general population if they seek medical attention in an aspect where there is a PPP situation where the private sectors move with the public sector? Would they have to be paying for fees there or for medical care at that institution if that is successful?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think the member is being a bit previous. That is a question we cannot answer now. It will be determined by the nature of the outcome of the public-private partnership. We will determine what goes on there. And until we have determined by collaboration between the government and the external partner, we can't answer that question. Because as I'm speaking to you now, I don't know what the proposals we have requested will be. We have to wait until persons who are interested have expressed that interest. The government will then evaluate that interest or those interests and determine which one is best for the national population.
Supplemental, Caroni East.
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister. The expressions of interest, do they include both the adult aspect of the hospital and the pediatric, or one or the other?
I just told you, it doesn't only include everything in the structure, it also includes the contents. It's a total offering, structure and contents.
All right, okay.
So that the persons who are looking at it will determine what they can do with the government on what is there. Everything that is there is under consideration.
Okay.
Member for Naprima, question number 8.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that citizens are daily losing hope in the ability of this government to deal with escalating crime? And in these circumstances, could he state the specific policies being put in place to assuage their concerns?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Why, I know of no situation where the citizens are daily losing hope. What I do know is that the people of Trinidad and Tobago, for quite some time, not starting September 7, 2015, but for quite some time, have been dealing with an intractable, unacceptable level of violent criminal conduct. And insofar as there's a response from the government of Trinidad and Tobago today, our response has been to hold the agencies that we are resourcing and supporting accountable for carrying out their duties in responding to the criminal element. And insofar as they, largely led by the police service, have been responding, the response has been over and above the normal standard policing in communities. The police service embarks on and maintain a very high level of hotspot policing, targeting priority offenders, heightened efforts to find and seize illegal firearms. But of course, recently we've been seeing a number of persons being killed by knife and stone and choking and whatever. And however, we go on to support the police with high levels of visible policing and increased patrols, including joint patrols with the Defence Force. And we are holding out the prospect that in the very near future, our municipal reform will add community policing in a very significant way to that effort. the police service is actively supporting its engagement with the police youth clubs, and we are partnering with a number of communities to try and steer youngsters away from being enticed into a life of crime. We are also ensuring that the police is adequately resourced with those items which are required to discharge their duties. And of course, we are encouraging the police at every level to root out rogue officers from the police service. And we are making increased use of technology in information gathering. And of course, at the level of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, we have been cooperating very actively with our external partners to increase collaboration in crime fighting between Trinidad and Tobago and regional and international bodies who have an interest in what we're doing here, and we have an interest in what they're doing for us outside. So it's a comprehensive effort, and there's no question of losing hope. The worst thing you could do is to lose hope in the face of difficulty.
Supplemental, member for Naparima.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, given that we have heard most of these strategies before and they seem to be not working, would the Prime Minister give us a timeline with a deadline to achieve the goals set out by those strategies he has identified?
I am not going to get into any useless old talk about that, because crime is not fought like that. It is not fought like that. We are approaching crime fighting as a comprehensive exercise which has to be sustained with no end date.
Can the
Supplemental, member for Naparima.
Yes. Can the Prime Minister not give us comfort to say by murder rate will be decreased by 10% in 6 months by these strategies?
Member, I would not entertain that question. It's similar along the lines of the one that just went. Member for Barataria Sanwan.
Could the Prime Minister, on that note, indicate that if he could utilize his good office to decrease the violent type of imagery utilized on platforms to sensitize crowd behavior?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm sure that the member would find support on this side if he encourages his members not to go about abusing people personally and accusing them of rape and pedophilia and similar kinds of disgraceful conduct from your platform. Charity begins at home.
Okay, members, please. Supplemental, Barataria Sanwan. Members, please. Thank you.
I will assure the Prime Minister I will do my best once he does his, on his side.
Oh. Member for Naparima, question number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Prime Minister state 4 areas in which he intends to diversify our economy away from the energy sector? And can he give an undertaking to provide a number of jobs anticipated in each area?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the answer to this question has been given on many, many occasions and very many platforms. And I could tell you, Mr. Speaker, manufacturing in its very many forms is our #1 effort, including manufacturing in the metallurgy area and in other areas that have been traditional to us. Agriculture and agro-processing. And you would have seen in the last budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the Minister of Finance has made agro-processing tax and duty-free activity. Maritime services #3, where we're working on the possibilities of establishing shipbuilding, ship repair, dry docking and yachting services. And again, we've given fiscal incentives with respect to yachting services. And of course, the creative industries, film, entertainment, fashion and design. Those are just 4 areas.
Supplemental, member for Naparima.
Again, I look for quantifiable objectives. Could he, in the light of the fact that we have lost an estimated 20,000 jobs, could you give an indication of how this will help in meeting that shortfall?
And if I may quote the members on the previous era, we expect that with the successful implementation of these matters, operationalized within our ability as a country and the resources available and the markets available, that we expect to grow our job market by thousands and thousands.
Member for Shogunas East, question number 10.
Very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 10 to the Honourable Prime Minister. Will the Honourable Prime Minister please state why the report on the government assistance for tuition expenses gate not yet been made public?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the GATE Task Force was a cabinet-appointed committee to review policy guidelines on GATE and to make recommendations as it saw fit. The task force reported, and that report was submitted to the cabinet, and the cabinet used that body of information, including advice and recommendations, to establish a government policy on GATE. And that policy was made public on August 3rd, 2016. I don't know that the report itself had a requirement to be published in public. What the report did was to advise the government as to what of the many options. And we did say at the time that there were some options that were offered to us which we accepted and some which we didn't accept. But I don't know that it has to be a public document. It's advice to the cabinet.
Supplemental, Honourable Member.
Honourable Prime Minister, given the nature of this report and the wide-ranging implications, is it possible for the public, and including members of Parliament, to have access to this report?
I have no difficulty in making it available because we have nothing to hide.
Thank you.
Supplemental, Member.
Honourable Prime Minister, just as a follow-up, will you be kind enough to indicate by when we can expect this report?
Now that you have raised it and you've requested it, I'll make it available in the not-too-distant future.
Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, in light of the Prime Minister's recent statement that the People's Partnership spent $350,000 in roti for the Diwali function at Diplomatic Centre, can the Prime Minister indicate whether he has seen or is in possession of a bill to this effect?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Proceed.
The comment that is being addressed here is a comment which has to do with wanton spending and profligacy of the worst kind. And I have seen.
Honourable Prime Minister. Member, you asked a question. He is giving an answer. Please, you will have an opportunity to give your supplemental. Proceed.
I have seen, Mr. Deputy Speaker, documentation, including invoices, which indicate that the last government, in serving a roti meal, which is a vegetarian diet, the catering cost not $350 but $394,568. The actual roti on the plate, was $250,000. And to put it from the plate to the mouth and having the plate was another, the $138,000. And contrary in trying to Mr. Speaker, I need a protection, Mr. President.
Members, on the opposite side, you all have asked the question. Please, let's get the answer. You will have the opportunity for the supplemental. Proceed. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in seeking to respond to this matter of the nature of the meal and the cost, the opposite members, my friend from Princeton, missed the point that the Diwali function under the last government cost $1.677 million.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the question is whether we spent $350 in roti. That is the question. Yes.
Mr. Prime Minister, 1 second. Member for Princestown, this is the third time you have asked the question and the Honourable Prime Minister is giving a response. When it's completed, you're going to have your opportunity to give your supplemental. Chief Whip, Chagonas West, please. This is the third time I've spoken with regards to the member for Princestown. You will have your opportunity to respond in a proper fashion. Proceed, Mr. Prime Minister.
In the context of the catering at $390,000, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it has to be seen against the background that in 2016 a similar function was held in response to the arrival of Diwali by another government of Trinidad and Tobago, which I head, and that function cost us under $300,000.
Entire function.
And I am not surprised that the member for Princeton is behaving like that, because the profligacy of which I speak is similar to an employee in the Prime Minister's office carrying a handbag for $1.5 million and $600,000 in overseas travel allowance to carry a scarf. So I can understand his behavior. That is the profligacy I'm talking about. And it's not about roti, it's about profligacy in its general sense.
Member for Princess Tongue, supplemental.
Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister was very specific when he made his statement. He said $350,000 in roti. Do you have a bill to show $350,000 in roti?
And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I confirm that catering...
Member, this is the last time, honourable member, this is the last time I'm going to tolerate you shouting across this chamber. Honourable Prime Minister.
And this is the last time that I'm going to state the facts for the public that the catering for a vegetarian Diwali roti meal cost $394,000.
Supplemental Naparima.
Is the Prime Minister willing to place...
I just stated that...
Honourable member, could you just leave the chamber for a 15-minute period, please? Hold on, Mr. Prime Minister. Members on the other side. Member for Chaguanas West, as the Chief Whip, I am not going to continue to tolerate the outbursts that will continue to come. Right? Member for Princess Tongue has now been suspended for 15 minutes, and members at the lower end, member for Oropuch East, member for Couva North, please. South. My apologies. Right. Proceed, Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, notwithstanding the attempt at confusion, I want to put on the record that the catering for a roti meal at the Prime Minister's residence was $395,000, for which the actual food on the plate was $250,000. And I dare say, Mr. Speaker, since members of Parliament are prepared to stand up in here and call me a liar, I will invite at least one member of the media to see the documents, because I do not want to bring into public discourse those persons who supply the services.
Honourable Prime Minister.
And therefore, I will make it available in that way.
Your time period has expired.